There are two financial worlds. One is printed in newspapers and public filings. The other is never meant to be found. This is the story of the second world. Wealth at this scale doesn't sit in bank accounts. It lives inside structures, invisible, layered, silent. Generations have built these walls, and only a few know the doors. A single signature, a new entity, born on paper, owning everything, traceable to no one. This is how empires become invisible. Journalists have chased these structures for decades. The Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, each leak revealing only a fraction of a system far deeper than anyone imagined. The tool at the center of it all? The synthetic asset, not a stock, not a bond, a legal construction, designed to own without owning, designed to own without owning. A trust is not owned, it is controlled. The family's name appears nowhere, yet every asset inside moves at their instruction. Perfect invisibility, perfect legality. Generational wealth doesn't survive by accident. It survives through architecture, legal architecture, built to outlast nations, governments, tax codes. Legal architecture, built to outlast nations, governments, tax codes, and built to stay hidden. Every structure starts with a certificate, a company registered in a jurisdiction that asks almost nothing. Name optional, owner confidential, purpose classified. Layer 1, a holding company. Layer 1, a holding company. Layer 2, a subtrust. Layer 3, a nominee director. By Layer 7, no regulator on Earth can follow the trail. Physical assets disappear into free ports, outside customs, outside tax records. Art, gold, rare assets held in legal limbo, owned by entities that exist only on paper. The invisibility is absolute and complete. Art is the perfect synthetic asset. Value is subjective, ownership is private. A painting can double in value overnight, tax-free, and nobody ever has to know who holds it. The family office, the command center of dynastic wealth. It manages assets that technically don't exist. In names that officially hold nothing, this is the architecture of power. Land, the oldest asset class. But in a Delaware LLC, the land has no face. Thousands of acres, owned by 4 letters and a number. Registered by a registered agent who's never set foot on the soil. 1 address, 10,000 companies. Each company with a nominee director, a paid name on paper. The real owner, buried behind a privacy trust? In a country with no public corporate registry, these strategies aren't new. They've been refined across generations. Each crisis, a war, a revolution. They've been refined across generations. Each crisis, a war, a revolution, a tax reform, sharpening the tools, until the architecture became nearly impossible to penetrate. Synthetic assets entered a new era with derivatives, instruments designed not to own, but to mimic ownership. All the economic benefit, none of the legal title, and none of the public record. A total return swap? You get every economic gain from an asset without ever holding it, without it appearing on your balance sheet. The bank holds the legal title. You hold the shadow. Private equity is another layer of distance. Private equity is another layer of distance. The family invests through a trust. The trust holds an LP interest. The LP owns the company. The family owns none of it, officially. Regulators have tried, the EU's anti-money laundering directives. Beneficial ownership registers, mandatory, public. But lawyers moved faster than the law. The entire system remains fully intact. Every leak exposed a corner of the system. Names, amounts, jurisdictions, suddenly visible. And yet, the core architecture remains standing. The walls held firm. Elite families don't panic at leaks, they plan for them. Elite families don't panic at leaks, they plan for them. Legal structures are redrawn in hours. New jurisdictions, new nominees vanish before dawn. Suddenly the trail goes completely cold. Liechtenstein Stiftung, a foundation that owns itself. No shareholders, no public register, no inheritance tax. Used by European dynasties since 1926. The Vault of Europe. Swiss banking secrecy has technically ended. Swiss banking secrecy has technically ended. Officially, accounts are now reported, but the assets themselves never appear. The account holds a company. The company holds the world. Singapore rewrote the rules in 2020. The variable capital company, a hybrid entity, fund and corporate structure in one. Assets repackaged, identity shielded, records sealed, the new capital of secrecy. Dubai became the new frontier. Zero income tax, zero capital gains, real estate purchased through offshore entities. A city built on assets that officially don't belong to anyone. The desert mirage of wealth. Physical presence follows the same rules. The home isn't owned by the family. It's leased from a trust. A paper labyrinth with a swimming pool at its center. Ownership is a myth. Control is everything. Citizenship itself becomes a synthetic asset, a second or third passport, purchased legally, creating new tax residency, detaching the person from their original paper trail. The sovereign assent, the final goal is perpetuity, wealth that survives its creator. The final goal is perpetuity, wealth that survives its creator. Structured so cleverly that death taxes become irrelevant, because legally, the founder never owned any of it. The dynasty outlives the individual. South Dakota's Dynasty Trust. No rule against perpetuities, wealth locked in forever for descendants not yet born. The family name, never on a single document. The Invisible Harvest, Delaware, America's own offshore. More LLCs than people. Delaware, America's own offshore. More LLCs than people. Formation in 24 hours. No public ownership record. Used by dynasties, celebrities, oligarchs, all equally welcome. The Paper Fortress, New York's luxury real estate. 40% of apartments sit empty. New York's luxury real estate. 40% of apartments sit empty. Not homes, like storage units for synthetic wealth. Each one held by an LLC nobody can trace. The invisible real estate. The global response has been vocal, persistent, largely ineffective. The global response has been vocal, persistent, largely ineffective. Regulators chase structures that dissolve on contact. By the time the law arrives, the asset has moved. Reborn in a new form, a new jurisdiction, a new name. This knowledge is deliberately kept scarce, sold as a service. The gap between those who know and those who don't is worth trillions of dollars a year. The price of admission is silence. Journalists have built the most complete picture of this system. Nearly 800,000 entities, and still, only the visible edge. The deeper structures remain untouched. The reckoning begins. Part 1 ends where the mystery begins. The architecture is real. Part 1 ends where the mystery begins. The architecture is real. The invisibility is manufactured, and the families who built it are already building the next layer. And the families who built it are already building the next layer. Welcome to Part 2. The invisible empire continues. Every structure begins the same way. A client, a brief, a mandate of total confidentiality. What follows is not crime. It is craft. The most sophisticated legal craft money can buy. The meeting that changes everything is always private. No minutes kept, no recordings. A decision made between family members, then delegated downward. To lawyers who will never know the full picture. British Virgin Islands, the jurisdiction of choice for 40% of offshore structures globally. No public register, no corporate tax, no exchange of information, unless forced. A financial firewall in the Caribbean sun. The Bahamas executive entity, the latest evolution. Not a company, not a trust, not a foundation. A hybrid, purpose-built to hold family assets, with no legal category that existing regulation can touch. Communication itself is part of the architecture. Instructions are verbal or encrypted. Nothing that can be subpoenaed, nothing that survives discovery. The paper trail ends before it begins. Luxembourg's So Par Fi, a participation exemption holding company, receiving dividends tax-free, used by hundreds of European dynasties. A perfectly legal vehicle, fully compliant and sanctioned, perfectly invisible in public records. Private banking isn't just asset management, it's identity management. Your banker knows more about your true wealth than any tax authority, and the relationship is protected by law. The Cayman Islands hold more financial assets than most G20 nations. Offered to sophisticated investors only, minimum $10 million. Because the regulatory framework was designed deliberately for privacy, by advisors working for the same families who use it. The letters of wishes, the most powerful document in dynasty planning. Not legally binding, not a public record, but followed to the letter by every trustee who values the relationship. The Channel Islands, Jersey and Guernsey, British Crown dependencies, British in culture, independent in law, trust frameworks built over centuries, and updated every time regulators in London get too close. Art auctions are a primary mechanism for moving wealth invisibly. A telephone bidder can remain anonymous. The asset transacted, transferred, and absorbed, off the record. Art auctions are a primary mechanism for moving wealth invisibly. A telephone bidder can remain anonymous. Payment through a corporate account, no individual name attached. The asset transacted, transferred, and absorbed, then off the record. A $300 million super yacht flagged in the Marshall Islands. The family boards as guests of the entity, flying the world in assets that officially aren't theirs. The family name, nowhere in the chain. Self-custody wallets, held by the individual, traceable by no regulator. Private aviation follows the same template. Aircraft registered offshore, operated by management companies, flying the world in assets that officially aren't theirs. Cryptocurrency added a new dimension. Self-custody wallets held by the individual, traceable by no regulator. A hardware device in a Swiss vault worth $500 million. A hardware device in a Swiss vault worth $500 million. In the public record, nothing. Decentralized finance opened new corridors. Assets moved through smart contracts, self-executing, anonymous. No bank, no intermediary. The synthetic asset met the digital frontier. Decentralized finance opened new corridors. The Gulf's family offices manage generational petrodollar wealth. Structured through Abu Dhabi's ADGM, a zero-tax, full privacy regime. Structured through Abu Dhabi's ADGM, a zero-tax, full privacy regime. Assets distributed globally, linked to the family through structures. Hong Kong's wealthy families pioneered the multi-jurisdictional structure. Governance in Hong Kong, a family that exists everywhere and belongs nowhere. Assets in BVI, banking in Singapore, residence in London, legal structure in the Caymans. Governance in Hong Kong, a family that exists everywhere and belongs nowhere. The family participates in every gain, without ever appearing on any shareholder register. South Dakota became the onshore Caymans. Each series isolated from the others, legally fireproof. A single document holding a dynasty's most sensitive holdings. Compliant, legal, and effectively invisible to most tax authorities. No cap on trust duration, no state income tax. Minimal oversight, a backdoor into European legitimacy, for those who know how to use it. Mauritius routes Indian subcontinent wealth globally. A tax treaty with India used by wealthy families for decades. Capital flowing out and back, taxed nowhere along the way. The island is a legal miracle, one treaty at a time. Panama survived the papers. The firms changed their names, the structures adapted, investments grow tax-free, proceeds paid as a death benefit. Compliant, legal, and effectively invisible to most tax authorities. The Double Irish is officially closed. Its replacements are already operating. Kaya, the Knowledge Development Box, IP holding structures, each one compliant. KIA, the Knowledge Development Box, IP holding structures, each one compliant. Malta sits inside the EU, with the heart of a tax haven. Private funds, citizenship programs, minimal oversight. A backdoor into European legitimacy. For those who know how to use it, a backdoor into European legitimacy. For those who know how to use it. Behind every structure is a family governance system. Rules governing how wealth moves, who decides, who knows. The island is a legal miracle, one treaty at a time. The island is a legal miracle, one treaty at a time. Death taxes trigger on personal assets. The family holds no personal assets. The empire is immortal. CRS, the Common Reporting Standard, 120 countries automatically sharing account information. It seemed like the end. It was the beginning of the next evolution. The response to CRS was swift and surgical. Move assets from reportable accounts into non-reportable structures. The game never ended, it merely changed rules. When major jurisdictions tightened, new ones emerged: Samoa, Vanuatu, Cook Islands. Remote, obscure, resistant to international pressure, the last lines of defense for the most sensitive structures. The Cook Islands Asset Protection Trust. Courts have tried to penetrate it for decades. Every time, the trust has held, designed not merely to protect, but to be impenetrable by design. The Double Irish is officially closed. Its replacements are already operating. Kaya, the Knowledge Development Box, IP holding structures, each one compliant. Each one designed to achieve the same result. The Netherlands runs a quiet empire. Royalty, holding companies, IP structures. The Netherlands runs a quiet empire. Royalty, holding companies, IP structures. Hundreds of billions in private family wealth. Held in Dutch cooperatives that pay no withholding tax on distributions. Behind every structure is a family governance system. Rules governing how wealth moves, who decides, who knows. These documents are the most confidential of all. No regulator has ever seen one. These documents are the most confidential of all. No regulator has ever seen one. The empire must continue undisturbed. The empire must continue undisturbed. Proceeds paid as a death benefit, compliant, legal, and effectively invisible to most tax authorities. CRS, the Common Reporting Standard, 120 countries automatically sharing account information. It seemed like the end. It was the beginning of the next evolution. The response to CRS was swift and surgical. Move assets from reportable accounts into non-reportable structures. The game never ended, it merely changed rules. When major jurisdictions tightened, new ones emerged: Samoa, Vanuatu, Cook Islands, remote, obscure, resistant to international pressure. The last lines of defense for the most sensitive structures. The Cook Islands Asset Protection Trust. Courts have tried to penetrate it for decades. Every time, the trust has held, designed not merely to protect, but to be impenetrable by design. Designed not merely to protect, but to be impenetrable by design. The conference that doesn't appear in any press release. No coverage, no guest list. No agenda published. Ideas exchanged between the architects of invisibility. The system updated in real time at a dinner in a private estate. Part 2 has shown you the architecture, jurisdictions, instruments, structures, systems. In Part 3, the stakes rise and the cracks begin to appear. Courts have tried to penetrate it for decades. Every time, the trust has held. Designed not merely to protect, but to be impenetrable by design. The conference that doesn't appear in any press release, no coverage, no guest list, no agenda published. Ideas exchanged between the architects of invisibility. The system updated in real time at a dinner in a private estate. Part 2 has shown you the architecture, jurisdictions, instruments, structures, systems. The system updated in real time at a dinner in a private estate. Part 2 has shown you the architecture, the unseen grid of global power. The unseen grid. Part 2 has shown you the architecture, connecting the dots across a world that officially does not exist. The invisible remains unseen and the architecture holds firm. 11.5 million documents revealed. A leak like no other. A single source, anonymous. The cracks begin to show in the fortress. A leak the size of which had never happened before in history. The Panama Papers had arrived. The world was about to change. The ICIJ coordinated the largest journalistic investigation in all of history. 400 journalists, 80 countries, one shared mission to find the truth. 1 year of silence before publication, connecting the invisible dots. What they found changed the world's understanding of where the wealth hides. The first casualty, Iceland's prime minister, named in the leaked data, connected to an offshore company holding claims against collapsed banks. He resigned. The structure survived. Others under scrutiny hired better lawyers. Reykjavik felt the shockwaves. The architects of secrecy began to evolve. For every family named in the leak, 10 restructured preemptively in silence. The crisis became a catalyst, not for transparency, but for deeper concealment. The leak accelerated the evolution of the invisible financial network, the rapid evolution into the deep shadows of the global system. Sanctions brought the next crisis, a new wave of financial exposure. Russia's invasion of Ukraine accelerated the exposure of hidden assets. Western governments scrambled to seize assets across the global landscape. And discovered they simply could not find them, hidden by design. The Klepto-Capture Task Force pursuing the untouchable assets at sea. The most aggressive seizure operation in United States history has begun, and still, the vast majority of assets remained entirely untouched. Protected by the same structures this documentary has been exposing today. The unexplained wealth order, a weapon to pierce the corporate veil. Reverse the burden, prove exactly where the money came from. A powerful tool, rarely used, stalled in the gears of justice. Hampered by the same legal complexity it was designed to pierce. In 2022, the European Court of Justice issued a ruling. Mandatory public beneficial ownership registers were deemed a privacy violation. The European Union's transparency effort was struck down in court by the very laws designed to protect European citizens from overreach. Even the best investigators hit walls, a maze of shell companies. A structure that spans 12 jurisdictions requires 12 legal processes, each with different standards of evidence, each with its own timeline, its own politics, its own barriers to international cooperation and justice. Banks file millions of suspicious activity reports annually across the world. Most go unread. The system is overwhelmed by the sheer volume. And the filers, still serving the same clients. Business as usual. SR and carry on. The cycle of secrecy remains unbroken. 2021. The Pandora Papers had arrived. Larger than Panama, more comprehensive than ever before. And with almost no lasting structural change to the system. Because the tools to enforce simply don't match the tools to hide. The Enablers Act, a bill to hold wealth advisors accountable. It never left committee. The industry had more resources than the legislators pursuing it, a power imbalance in Washington. Stalled by the very experts it sought to regulate. Silence once again. The lobbying industry spent $4.2 billion in a single year. opposing transparency, shaping regulation to favor the architects. The architects of invisibility operating at every level of power, of the system designed to hold them accountable. The invisible hand. Technology began to fight back. AI-powered transaction monitoring, beneficial ownership verification, mapping what legal systems cannot. The technological arms race on full display across the network. But the structures evolved faster than the tools. A hidden race. Small jurisdictions face existential pressure from the global north. Implement transparency or lose access to global banking. Delayed. The response: partial compliance, strategic delay, enough to stay off. Not enough to actually reveal anything. A performance of reform. The Corporate Transparency Act, America's first ownership database. Mandatory reporting, with 23 exemptions for the elite. Large operating companies exempt. The most sophisticated structures. Untouched. A fortress with many backdoors built into the law. The OECD in Paris, the global standard setter for transparency. The global minimum tax, 15% beneath corporate profit. But family wealth isn't corporate. Pillar 2 has a blind spot. The game continues, just with a slightly higher floor for all. Interpol's Financial Crimes Unit coordinates the global effort. When they succeed, the coverage is dramatic and far-reaching. But the ratio of assets seized to assets hidden remains low. In favor of the hidden, a vast ocean, a few captured drops. Even when assets are frozen, the legal fight is monumental. Trust law, jurisdictional conflicts, standing issues, complexity. The complexity that was designed to protect becomes the weapon. Against the investigators. Justice delayed, justice denied by design. The enforcement gap is not a failure of intelligence, it is will. The regulators who know most have the fewest tools to fight. The politicians with the most tools have the most conflicts, compounded by institutional capacity. A system designed to exhaust. Sometimes the fortress falls from within, a family dispute, a disgruntled heir, litigation that forces disclosure no regulator could compel. The structure exposed not by law, but by inheritance, internal fracture. The first crack in a structure built for decades. Secrets emerge. Divorce court, the most effective tool for piercing offshore structures. Courts compel full disclosure. Matrimonial law doesn't play. 47 pages. Assets that survive tax authorities, surrendered to the scrutiny of a judge. The structure unwound, a private war, a public truth, secrecy surrender. The dynasty's greatest vulnerability, the next generation, siblings at war. Geneva felt the fracture, spouses who aren't bound by the silent pact. At what was never meant to be seen, the paper trail of power ends here, by the very people it was built to protect, the endgame of secrecy. The architecture isn't only for old European dynasties. New wealth? From tech, commodities, emerging markets, adopting the same tools to hide. The invisible empire is growing, not shrinking, a global expansion. Same structures, new faces, spreading across the global south in silence. Digital assets created the next frontier. Blockchain is transparent, but pseudonymous. You can see the money move, not who moved it. Digital shadows. The synthetic asset found its perfect digital form. Fast, liquid, hidden. The gap between law and technology visible. A new game of digital shadows. Sanctions added a geopolitical dimension. The same structures built for tax, now being used by sanctioned states and their proxies. Strategic evasion. The architecture served power, regardless of legitimacy. A weapon of state, connecting dozens of entities in a spiderweb of denial. Global reach. Convictions do happen occasionally. An architect goes too far, justice rare. The line crossed from avoidance to evasion, a rare moment of public justice. The few who got caught, a rounding error in the global system, locked away. For every conviction, 1,000 structures never reviewed, unseen power. Progress has been made, systems have improved, but it's not enough. Davos elite. The pace of reform and the pace of evasion are not equal, outpaced. And the scoreboard favors concealment. The architects are winning the war. Between the room inside and the crowd outside, a growing disconnect, cracks. Even exposure doesn't mean ending. The family regroups, rebuilds in the dark. Within 72 hours, the structure reconstituted, dissolve and reform, fluid. Like water, always finding a new form, impossible to grasp for long, overnight. Rising on another, the architecture is fluid, relentless, eternal, sunset to dawn. Political risk drives the demand. Survival, not just greed. Cape Town's elite. Moving wealth offshore becomes a hedge against instability, a lifeline found. The line between protection and evasion, contested in every office. The elite, Capital follows the path of least resistance, and most concealment, Table Mountain. The academic consensus is unambiguous. The cost is staggering to the world. The offshore concealment costs developing nations $170 billion. In lost tax revenue, that is, hospitals not built, schools not funded, empty, systems not sustained, the phantom tax that everyone else pays, unseen cost. The human cost is distributed and invisible, hollowed from above, austerity. A hospital wing not built because capital fled offshore, a bridge unrepaired. Tax receipts fell short, the connection between the yacht and the pothole, short. Never drawn, but felt in every street, every home, every empty coffer, market. The UN has a resolution, a framework for a global tax convention, a plan, an opposition from the nations that host the most offshore wealth, stalemate. Progress moves at the speed of consensus, which is almost no speed at all, G7. A stalemate in the sky while the architecture below hardens, the UN. The industry speaks fluently about responsibility, ESG commitments, Stad, transparency pledges, regulatory compliance, the language of reform, masked. And at the same table, the same structures reformatted, managed narrative, the architecture of concealment wearing the mask of progress. Perfect evening. The cracks exist in court proceedings, in leaked data, in pressure, contrast. But the fortress has been built for centuries, solid, unyielding, for now, child. The coffers and the promises both stretch thin. A breaking point reached? Vault. Part 4 answers the question, what happens next? The reckoning, rising towers. Every generation has believed this would end. That exposure would lead to accountability. That accountability would lead to change. And every generation has been partially right and mostly wrong. The UN Tax Convention, or in development, a binding multilateral framework for the first time, if ratified, a fundamental shift in the rules. The largest structural reform since Bretton Woods. Artificial intelligence is rewriting the capacity for financial investigation, pattern recognition at scale, entity resolution across jurisdictions. The tools that took human investigators years, now running in minutes. For the first time, the technology curve may be bending toward transparency. Estonia proved the possible, a digital nation, full digital governance, corporate registration linked to tax, to ownership, to the state, a model for what financial transparency infrastructure could look like. If political will match technological capability, the next generation of reformers is arriving. They connect tax justice, climate finance, and economic inequality. As one continuous system, it is moving, and they are not willing to wait another century, even within elite families. The conversation is shifting. The next generation faces different pressures: reputation, regulation, climate, public legitimacy. Some are choosing transparency, choosing it strategically or sincerely. Voluntary disclosure programs exist for a reason. Some families choose to re-enter the public record. The amnesty is real, the benefit is real, and the number who take that path remains small. The momentum is real, even if slow. Beneficial ownership registers, automatic exchange, minimum taxes, each a partial brick in an incomplete wall. But the direction, finally, is unmistakable. Peer pressure works at geological speed. Jurisdictions that once resisted are now complying. Not from values, from market access. The threat of blacklisting is the most effective tool yet deployed. Court by court, ruling by ruling. The legal landscape is shifting. Structures that were considered impenetrable are being penetrated. The law catches up slowly, but it does catch up. The first public beneficial ownership register changed everything. Journalists, regulators, citizens, suddenly able to see who owns what. Each new register, another wall of the fortress removed. The walls are falling one entity at a time. The generation trained to build these structures is being followed by a generation trained to dismantle them. The profession is bifurcating now, into those who hide wealth and those who find it. The G20 has committed to transparency repeatedly. Each summit, a renewed pledge, each implementation, incomplete. But each cycle, a little tighter than the last. The momentum is building toward a global standard. Investigative journalism remains the most consistent force for exposure. Under-resourced, legally threatened, persistently effective, every major reform preceded by a major investigation. The pen still moves the world. The idea of a global asset registry is gaining ground. Every asset registered globally to a verified owner. Publicly searchable, a single reform to change everything. The call for transparency is now global. The ultra-wealthy are not monolithic. Some see the world changing and are choosing a different path. Transparency not as threat, but as strategy. the empire redefined for a new era. The same technology that enabled anonymous crypto is now being deployed for radical transparency, immutable, verifiable, decentralized. The irony, the blockchain may close the door it once opened. The private banking industry is de-risking, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Structures that were once welcomed now trigger scrutiny. The walls of the fortress increasingly unwelcome hosts. Tax authorities are finally catching up technologically. Data integration, machine learning, international cooperation. The cost of concealment rising faster than the benefit for all but the most sophisticated structures. If a global asset registry becomes law, the architecture of invisibility faces an existential question. Not immediately, not completely. But for the first time, the travel is toward the light. Built in the shadow of world wars and revolutions. Built in the shadow of world wars and revolutions. The most sophisticated system of protection ever created, facing a world beginning to ask, whose is this? The structures it built, still standing. Inheriting everything predecessors made invisible. Facing a world beginning to ask, whose is this? When capital returns, things are built. The invisible wealth, made visible, becomes tangible. The argument for transparency is not abstract. It walks through the school gate every morning. The global financial system is more connected than ever. That connectivity, which enabled concealment, is now being weaponized for transparency. The same network that hid wealth can expose it. When it works, it is extraordinary. A name emerges from behind 40 years of structure. Accountability attaches to a person, not a code. The law's long arm, finally reaching. The institutions that built the invisible empire are not immune to the forces reshaping it. The most ancient financial houses in Europe are adapting because the alternative is extinction. No single reform will end this. The system was built over centuries, but the direction has changed. The work is not glamorous. It is relentless, technical, underpaid, and it is the work that moves the world. One name, one entity, one truth at a time. The reckoning is not a moment, it is a process. Slow, contested, imperfect, but inevitable. Because the public has seen enough to know what they are owed. Wealth that was invisible can choose to be seen. The power to reveal belongs to the family, bringing hidden capital into the light. The moral architecture alongside the legal one. Every city is also a city of ordinary people who pay their taxes in full, on time, who live in the world the empire partially built, and partially chose not to fund. The declaration is signed, it is not a solution. It is a statement of intent by a world that has grown impatient. With the architecture of disappearance, the invisible empire is not a conspiracy. It is a system built and maintained legally, for the benefit of those who could afford it. And at the cost of those who could not, some families are choosing the open door, not because they are forced, but because they understand that legitimacy is the only asset that cannot be structured away. The empire is not yet visible, but the work has never been more urgent. The invisible has been named, and what can be named can eventually be changed.